Welcome to Newsday on the BBC. I'm Marie Goy in Singapore. Our headlines this morning. Tensions are mounting about possible US military action in Syria. Jets and warships are moved into place, but President Trump adopts a less bullish tone.
We're looking very seriously, very closely at that whole situation, and we'll see what happens, folks. We'll see what happens.
Mike Pompeo faces a grilling by US senators at his confirmation hearing. President Trump's choice to become the Secretary of State denies he's a war hawk.
I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Also in this programme, airport misery. Why a Syrian man has spent weeks living inside an airport in Malaysia with little prospect of moving on. And the deportation threat facing the so-called Windrush generation. Commonwealth migrants who came to Britain in the 50s and 60s.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Good morning. It's 8 a.m. here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London and 8 p.m. in Washington, where there was a shift in tone from President Trump over the administration's approach to possible military action in Syria. Mr. Trump said that the decision would be made soon, but meanwhile his Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said no decision on any assaults had yet been made and that there would be a meeting of the National Security Council to discuss the issue. This came as French President Macron said he had proof it was the Syrian government which carried out the chemical attack near Damascus at the weekend. Here's our North America editor, John Sopel.
Weapons locked and loaded, sailors ready for action, this US carrier battle group left its home port in Norfolk, Virginia. Destination, the Eastern Mediterranean, still 5,000 miles away. And the senior officer awaiting orders to act from the president.
I'm so pleased and proud of the Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group team, 6,500 of the finest Americans you could ever sail with or serve with. We're trained, we're ready, any mission, anytime, anywhere, we're ready to go.
And though this powerful flotilla might be full steam ahead, you get the sense in Washington of rowing back. From the Commander-in-Chief today, the talk was a lot less bellicose. No more a big price to pay, no more decisions in 24 to 48 hours, no more nice, new and smart missiles raining down. Instead, this.
We're looking very seriously, very closely at that whole situation, and we'll see what happens, folks. We'll see what happens. It's too bad that the world puts us in a position like that.
And from the Defense Secretary, an insistence that no decisions to strike had been taken. All options were on the table. And what sounded like uncertainty over who was responsible for the attack.
I believe there was a chemical attack, and we're looking for the actual evidence. The OPCW, this is the Organization for the Chemical Weapons Convention. We're trying to get those inspectors in probably within the week.
But the Allies are not speaking with one voice. Listen to how much more definitive the French president is.
We
have proof that last week, now nearly 10 days ago, that chemical weapons were used, at least chlorine, and that they were used by Bashar al-Assad's regime.
US action a year ago amounted to little more than cratering a runway. It's still likely that this time multinational action will be more extensive and will come sooner rather than later. But with chemical weapons inspectors due to arrive in Douma at the weekend, the window for a quick response would appear to be closing fast. The Russians, though, still insist there's no justification for any action.
Washington continues to make militaristic statements that risk causing a dangerous escalation. There are accusations not only against Damascus, but also against the Russian Federation.
Donald Trump tweeted this morning that a military strike may come soon, or maybe not so soon. Now, if you're being generous, you could say this is the fog of war, keep the enemy guessing. Or it may be that there is still some confusion and indecision over what to do next. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
We'll return this a little later here on Newsday, but now let's take a look at some of the day's other news stories. We'll stay in the United States because Mike Pompeo, President Trump's nominee for the new U.S. Secretary of State, has faced questions from members of Congress in the Senate's confirmation hearing. Now, Mr. Pompeo, who is currently the director of the CIA, appeared to confirm reports that in February, around 200 Russians were killed in clashes with U.S.-led forces in Syria. He referred to the incident when he was asked if more sanctions were needed against Russia.
There's still more work to be done on CAATSA. There's more work to be done on other sanctions provisions as well. I readily concede that. Vladimir Putin has not yet received the message sufficiently, and we need to continue to work at that. But it hasn't just been sanctions. The largest expulsion of 60 folks was from this administration. This administration announced a nuclear posture review that has put Russia on notice that we're going to recapitalize our deterrent force in Syria. Now, a handful of weeks ago, the Russians met their match, and a couple hundred Russians were killed.
Mike Pompeo there. Well, also making news today, the Chinese President Xi Jinping has been overseeing the military's largest ever naval display, saying that the need for a strong maritime force has never been more urgent. 10,000 personnel and dozens of vessels took part in the drill in the South China Sea. Campaigners have called on the UAE to explain what's happened to a princess who posted a video online saying that her father, the ruler of Dubai, had put her in fear of her own life. The group, called Detained in Dubai, says that Sheikha Latifa Al Maktoum was fleeing on a yacht when it was boarded in international waters just last month by the Indian Coast Guard. She was then taken back to Dubai. A storm has destroyed 2 sandstone pillars that decorated the entry gates to the Taj Mahal in India. Officials said that the world-famous mausoleum in the northern city of Agra was hit by winds of 130 kilometers per hour. Work has begun to restore these damaged structures. Now, I'm sure that this is a moment that these elephants will never forget. 13 elephants in Laos were sold illegally to an animal park in Dubai. They have been saved by an animal sanctuary. The Conservation Project alerted the Laotian government about this particular deal, and then the Prime Minister personally blocked it. The animals have now left the sanctuary and they are staying in Laos.
Let's return now to our top story and the shift in tone from President Trump over possible military strikes by the U.S. and its allies in Syria. Earlier, I spoke to the BBC's Chris Buckler in Washington about the latest developments at the White House.
And the questions of when and if this military strike will happen, there have been diplomatic discussions continuing as they try to formulate a military plan. And certainly we now know that President Trump and Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister, have spoken. And in that conversation, they established that they believe that there has been a dangerous pattern of behaviour from the President Assad's regime in the use of chemical weapons. And they went on to say that it was agreed that the use of chemical weapons should not go unchallenged, and on the need to deter the further use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime. So again, you get the sense that some kind of military action is looming. Yet, just a short time ago, whenever President Trump left a meeting of the National Security Council here in Washington, it was also made clear that nothing has been decided yet. A plan is still being worked out. And I think that's partly because the UK, the US and France all have to be kept informed of this, but also they have to work out some kind of a joint strategy. Clearly there is talk about action, but exactly how sustained, how severe that will be, and exactly what its purpose is, those are all things that are still being discussed at a very high level.
As you say, there has been a bit of a shift in the tone from President Trump. Some people seem to think that tensions might be easing, but is that too soon to say that?
Yeah, I think it is too soon to say that. Truthfully, if you take a look at what President Trump has been saying, it has been that question of when strikes will happen, not a question of if they will happen. And certainly, although he's saying it might be soon, it might not be soon, you do get the sense that something is looming. And what is happening behind the scenes is that evidence is being gathered, or they're trying to assess the intelligence that they have. President Macron has gone much further in terms of what they believe France knows. The Americans are being somewhat circumspect at this stage. However, a number of US networks are reporting that US officials say that they have looked at some of the evidence that has come out of Syria, that there have been some blood and urine samples that have been examined, and it does indicate the use of chlorine and a nerve agent. Now, they say they can be confident about those results, but not 100% sure. But it's the kind of evidence that is being gathered as they work out what this response should be. There is also the issue of Russia as well. Russia making very clear that if there is a strike, then they will regard that as something very serious indeed. All of that is being measured up by the Americans, the UK and France. But at the same time, there is this feeling when you read the diplomatic discussions that something must be done by President Assad's regime, and that's something they agree.
Chris Buckler there, our correspondent in Washington, talking about the perspective from Washington, of course, from America, from the UK and also France. Let's speak to Alina Kilic, who's a freelance journalist covering the Syrian conflict, writing on Kurdish affairs in particular. Of course, Turkey is one of those countries that has a lot involved at stake within Syria, and President Erdogan has been speaking to President Putin over the phone.
Yes. Russia announced that Turkey was acting as a mediator between the United States and Russia in resolving the crisis, and Turkey's relationship with Russia is very important for Turkey because we know that Turkey was able to launch an operation against Kurdish-controlled areas in northern Syria with the green light from Russia, and obviously this is why it's very important for Turkey to not damage its relationship with Russia whilst it is responding to an alleged chemical attack. So it wants to stay in between and not sway too much to one side, although Turkey has said no chemical weapon should go unpunished and that those who have carried it out should be held to account.
So how can it then, it's in an impossible situation, how can it play both sides then, in the sense that it wants to maintain a relationship with Russia, but we've got this alleged chemicals weapon attack? What is the move now for Turkey?
Well, Turkey now does not trust the United States because, you know, it has said to the United States that it wants to see support for the Syrian Kurds come to an end. And that has not happened because the United States wants to defeat ISIS in the region, and this will not be done without the Syrian Kurds. So obviously, if ISIS will be defeated in the area, the United States needs to keep on arming the Syrian Kurds. And obviously, the relationship with Russia is very important because if an airstrike does go ahead, this would mean that Russia could retaliate with the Syrian regime by attacking the Syrian Democratic Forces controlled areas in Deir ez-Zor in eastern Syria, and so this would mean more crisis and tension in the region, and it would mean that the fight against ISIS will be impacted even more as it is now, because many fighters of the SDF have gone to Afrin to fight against Turkey and its allies, so it's very important in this sense.
And if things stay as they are, if we don't have a strike in the imminent future, of course the NATO Secretary General is due in Ankara on Monday. What can we expect there?
I think we should expect that the NATO General Secretary will speak about using Turkish airspace to launch attacks against the Syrian military and the position of Turkey against this. Obviously, Turkey needs to make a decision whether it wants to side with NATO or it wants to side with Russia, but it cannot actually choose one side. It chooses to be in the middle of both because it has important relationships with both, and especially on the issue of the Kurds, its relationship with Russia is very crucial.
A difficult situation. In the meantime, we watch and wait. Alina Kilic, thank you so much for your time.
Now, the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog, the OPCW, has confirmed that the UK's assessment of the nerve agent used against a former Russian spy and his daughter in Salisbury. The government has said it was Novichok, a poison developed in the Soviet era, and that the Russian state must have been behind last month's attack. Moscow has denied any involvement. Frank Gardner reports.
Investigating every possible site of last month's nerve agent poisoning in Salisbury has been exhaustive. Now Britain's findings have been backed up by the global chemical weapons watchdog, the OPCW. Today it published its report confirming the findings of the UK relating to the identity of the toxic chemical that was used in Salisbury. Britain's chemical defence laboratories at Porton Down quickly identified that toxic chemical as a Novichok. Today's report doesn't mention that word, but a second classified OPCW report has been given to governments, identifying the name and structure of the nerve agent, which it said was of high purity.
By itself, this is not going to be determinative, but if you look at the contextual facts of what we know about Novichoks, they were invented by Russia largely to avoid verification under the Chemical Weapons Convention.
Today, Russia's foreign ministry spokeswoman dismissed the report as being part of an operation to discredit Russia. Yulia Skripal, seen here before she was poisoned on March the 4th, is now in hiding somewhere in Britain with police protection. Russia has suggested she's being held against her will. Her father is still seriously ill in hospital. Tonight, Britain has called for a UN Security Council debate on the OPCW report. Officials say Russia has some hard questions to answer. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
You're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme. Airport misery, why a Syrian man has spent weeks living inside an airport in Malaysia with little prospect of moving on.
So coming up on the programme, the children of Commonwealth migrants who settled legally in the UK decades ago and whose right to stay is under threat.
Pol Pot, one of
Welcome back. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Marie Goy in Singapore.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London. Our top stories this hour. Tension mounts about possible US military action in Syria as jets and warships are moved into place.
Mike Pompeo faces a grilling by US senators at his confirmation hearing. But President Trump's choice to become the Secretary of State denies he's a war hawk. Let's now take a look at some front pages from around the world, and we start with the New York Times, which says that Latin American leaders will be missing Donald Trump this weekend. The paper looks at his decision to skip the Summit of the Americas and wonder if his absence will be interpreted as indifference. And here in Singapore, the Straits Times is concerned about the welfare of the most beloved bear here in Singapore. The 27-year-old, known as Inuka, was the first polar bear to be born in the tropics, but vets are now concerned and they've warned that his health might be declining. And finally, the China Daily reports on a restaurant making some really fast food using high-speed noodles. Customers there can expect their food to pull up on 2 wheels. The little truck there is designed to prevent people being scalded by hot bowls.
Millions of Syrians have tried to flee the 7-year conflict in their homeland, including Hassan al-Kontar. Now, he has spent over a month stranded in the transit section of Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia. A little earlier, I was able to speak to him.
I got here because I'm holding a piece of document that says I am a Syrian. I got here because since 8 years I am paying the bill of others' war in my land. I am here because my destiny has made by others fighting over power. My story is the story of hundreds, thousands, millions of Syrians who is facing rejection, racism since 8 years. We keep trying to tell others that we are a normal people, peaceful people, who is trying to be in a safe place. We don't want this war, but no one accepting us. I'm here because even my minimum rights as a human, I can't get it. Countries I'm allowed to be in has just deported me back. That's why I am here.
But Hassan, explain to us, because you had been working in the UAE, hadn't you? And then your work permit, your visa had expired. Just explain to us what technically happened to you.
In 2017, I has been deported from UAE. I could not manage to renew my passport for almost 6 years, from 2012 until 2017, because I was wanted in Syria. I still wanted in Syria for a military service. I refused to join the fight. So many Syrians are facing the same. So I could not renew my passport. In 2017, I have been deported from UAE to Malaysia because it's one of the few countries who was allowing us to enter with only an arrival visa for 90 days. Again, in Malaysia, there is no residence visa, there is no work for Syrians. It's a difficult country to be in. So I tried to approach other countries like Ecuador, but I could not reach there because someone in the Turkish airline decided just to cancel my ticket, and I lost all my money. Then the Cambodian authority, I tried to go to Cambodia. The Cambodian authority sent me back on the same day, on the same plane, to the Malaysia airport, and I'm stuck here since then.
Now, the fate of thousands of people from the Commonwealth who arrived in the UK legally as children has been the subject of an urgent diplomatic meeting. Despite having lived there and worked and paid taxes for decades, many now face possible deportation because of a lack of official paperwork. Our Community Affairs correspondent, Adina Campbell, has been listening to some of their stories.
Well, Vicky, here you go.
Grandfather Michael Braithwaite moved from Barbados to the UK when he was 9. But last year, while working as a special needs teaching assistant, the 66-year-old was let go because he couldn't provide proof of his legal living status.
When you heard the words illegal immigrants, how did that make you feel?
I just felt I felt the pieces inside. I didn't actually show it externally until I came home. I sat and I cried.
And how has it been over the last 2 years or so?
2 years, I think I've rationalized a lot of things inside myself, basically.
Citizens of the British Empire coming to the mother country with good intent.
Empire Windrush marked the beginning of mass multiculturalism in the late 1940s. But many of the children from that generation never applied for a passport or had official documents to prove their right to stay, which has now led to this unprecedented meeting between some of the UK's Caribbean High Commissioners.
15% of our population migrated to this country, and with toil and tears and sweat helped make the multicultural society and the modern economy that everyone celebrates today.
Here's the problem. The Home Office didn't keep a record or issue paperwork to Commonwealth citizens already living here in the UK when the Immigration Act came in back in 1971. And that's why some people are finding it difficult to prove their legal right to remain here in the UK. Former mechanic Albert Thompson, who doesn't want to give his real name, arrived from Jamaica as a child without a passport. He now needs radiotherapy for his prostate cancer treatment, but has been asked to foot the bill and pay the NHS more than £50,000, as he can't prove he's a legitimate citizen.
After been working all these years, paying my national insurance, that's what it's all about. But the way they treat me is not fair.
The Royal Marsden Hospital says Albert's receiving ongoing care from his GP, while the Home Office says all cases will be dealt with sensitively.
Look at you looking all sparse.
But with the uncertainty, that's not much comfort to those who say their lives are now firmly in the UK. Adina Campbell, BBC News.
You've been watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Marie Goy in Singapore.
And I'm Kasia Madeira in London, and just enough time to tell you about a lovely gorilla who has been copying his handler in a zoo in Florida.